"Don't bother coming back." That's all the text said. 6 words. I was standing in the produce aisle of a Whole Foods in downtown Brooklyn, staring at a pile of blood oranges when my phone lit up. At first I thought it was a joke, something sarcastic Noah might send to make me roll my eyes. But then another message appeared and my stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, Lena. This isn't working." It was like the floor tilted under me. I remember my hand tightening around the shopping basket until the thin plastic handle dug into my palm. A woman next to me was squeezing avocados, humming softly to herself, oblivious to the fact that my entire life had just been split in two. "My name is Lena Caraway, I'm 29 years old, and I had just been erased from the life I thought I was building." Noah wasn't just my boyfriend, he was my co-conspirator, my partner in late-night brainstorming sessions, my supposed future. And with 2 short messages he vanished. We had been together for 5 years. Met in the architecture program at NYU, where we bonded over a shared hatred of brutalist dorm buildings and a mutual obsession with boutique hotel design. Noah's mind was always running, sketching, imagining, reinventing. His dream was a glass and cedar retreat perched above the Pacific, somewhere along the cliffs of Mendocino. And I, God help me, made it my dream too. It wasn't just about love. We had plans, business models, a private Pinterest board full of floor-to-ceiling windows and reclaimed wood interiors. I'd sat across from him in tiny coffee shops, tracing my finger over the blueprints he drew, already picturing us walking those halls together. So when he disappeared, it wasn't just the relationship that collapsed. It was the scaffolding of my future. The first few days after the text were a fog. I called. I messaged. I left voicemails that started steady but ended with my voice shaking. No reply. Then his Instagram went silent. No new posts, no stories, no trace of his location. A week later, a mutual friend slipped up and told me he'd moved to Seattle. With her. Her being Claire Danner, the investor's daughter. She had attended exactly 2 of our project pitch meetings, always in designer clothes that looked like they belonged in an editorial spread. She smiled at Noah like she already owned him. I told myself I was imagining it, that he wouldn't risk our work, our years, for a fling. But apparently he had. I kept replaying our last month together, searching for cracks I'd ignored. There was the night he stayed late at networking drinks, and came home smelling like perfume I didn't own. The mornings he'd stare past me at breakfast, lost in thought. At the time I'd chalked it up to stress. God knows we'd been under pressure preparing our investor deck. Looking back, I realized he was already gone. I boxed up the life we'd built in a single weekend. His gray hoodie that I used to sleep in went into the donation pile. The stack of hotel design magazines, the ceramic mug we'd bought together at a roadside market in Big Sur, even the jar of gourmet mustard he loved. All gone. But the thing I couldn't throw away was his dream. That stupid, beautiful hotel. For weeks, I hated myself for still caring about it. I told myself I should erase every file, every sketch, every note we'd made. Yet I couldn't. Because somewhere under the anger and humiliation there was something else. A spark. It hit me in the most unremarkable place. A coffee shop in the East Village, rain streaking the windows while steam curled from my mug. I had my laptop open, scrolling mindlessly through job postings I didn't care about, when I opened the folder labeled Project Mendocino. The blueprints were still there. The renderings. The sustainability plan I'd stayed up 3 nights in a row perfecting. It was all so close to being real, and suddenly I saw a version of it that didn't have his fingerprints on it at all. That's when the shift happened. I stopped thinking of it as his dream. I started thinking of it as a challenge. What if I could make it bigger, better, smarter? What if I could turn the thing he abandoned into something worth more than he'd ever imagined? And if I was being honest, what if I could build it so successfully that one day, sitting in whatever corner office Claire had decorated for him in Seattle, Noah Caraway would see my name in a headline and know he'd let the wrong person walk away? That thought didn't just warm me. It lit me on fire. The first thing I learned about revenge is that it's never as glamorous as you think. It doesn't start with dramatic music and a perfectly tailored outfit. It starts at 3 in the morning in sweatpants, surrounded by cold takeout containers, with your laptop screen burning your retinas while you Google things like eco-friendly resort financing California. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days in New York, which was fine by me. It gave me an excuse to hide inside my apartment and sink into the kind of obsessive research I hadn't felt since grad school. I spread Noah's old sketches across my coffee table, but instead of lingering on the parts one recognized, his sweeping lines, his dramatic glass facades. I started tearing them apart in my head. Too much wasted space. Poor water runoff design. Unrealistic material sourcing for that kind of location. He had vision, yes. But vision without execution is just daydreaming, and Noah had always been more of a dreamer than a finisher. I, on the other hand, had spent years making other people's ideas actually work. So I started over. I kept the location. Mendocino was still perfect. But the structure became mine. I redesigned everything to maximize sustainability, energy independence, and coastal resilience. Triple glazed windows, gray water recycling, vertical gardens on the exterior walls. I researched suppliers, legal requirements for cliffside builds, even the nesting habits of the local seabirds so we could design around them. By the end of the first week, my desktop was a graveyard of open tabs. Grant applications, architectural software, potential investors, and about 16 half-read articles on boutique hospitality trends. But the problem was money. Always money. I had $14,000 in savings. Building what I envisioned would require at least $10 million to start. In Noah's world, that was where charm came in. He'd walk into a room, talk about the Pacific breeze and the magic of experiential luxury, and people would write checks. I didn't have his particular brand of seduction. But I had something else. Proof. While Noah had been whining and dining potential backers, I'd been the one compiling the financial models, the ROI projections, the operating cost breakdowns. Investors like pretty renderings, sure, but they trust spreadsheets. I could give them both. The second week, I made a list of every investor I'd ever brushed shoulders with at networking events, fundraisers, or even casual parties. I didn't care if the connection was thin. If they'd once asked me for a pen at a charity gala, they were going on the list. Somewhere near the top was Vivian Cole, a name I hadn't thought about in years. Vivian was a legend in sustainable real estate. She turned a bankrupt winery in Napa into a solar-powered, zero-waste resort that now had a 2-year waiting list. I'd met her only once, at a panel during an architecture expo in Chicago. She'd been magnetic in that effortlessly intimidating way, answering questions with a slow smile like she was letting you in on a secret. Afterward, I'd managed to introduce myself and she'd given me her card. I still had it. I stared at that card for a long time before drafting an email. I didn't tell her about Noah. I didn't tell her about betrayal or heartbreak or how personal this was for me. I pitched her the project like it was the only thing in the world worth paying attention to, and in that moment, it felt like it was. 48 hours later, she replied. Interesting concept. I'll be in New York next week. Let's talk. The night before our meeting, I barely slept. My tiny apartment was a disaster. Fabric swatches with samples, mood boards printed on cheap office paper. I practiced my pitch until my voice went hoarse, timing each section so it sounded effortless but not rehearsed. When the morning came, I walked into the lobby of the Greenwich Hotel feeling like I was stepping into another life. Vivian was already there, seated in a corner booth, sipping tea like she had all the time in the world. She listened. She asked sharp questions. He poked at weak spots in my plan, and instead of shrinking, I leaned in. I showed her the projections, the market gap, the partnerships I was already cultivating with eco-certified suppliers. Finally, she set her teacup down and looked at me the way people look when they've decided you're either about to make them a lot of money or waste a lot of their time. I'll fund your initial feasibility study, she said. But if I'm in, I'm not in halfway. If this works, we go all the way. And Lena, she smiled faintly. If you're going to do this, you'd better be ready to win. When I walked back out onto the street, the February air cut through my coat, but I didn't care. For the first time since that text in Whole Foods, my chest felt lighter. This wasn't about Noah anymore. This was about building something no one could take from me. The ocean tried to talk me out of it. That's the only way to describe the Mendocino coast. The first morning I stood on the bluff with my hair whipping my face and salt burning my lips. The Pacific roaring like a courtroom full of hostile witnesses. Wind tore at the edges of my rolled plans, gulls wheeled like hecklers, and the cliff itself felt wary. As if it was deciding whether I was one more person who would take without giving. I planted my boots wide on the damp grass and said out loud, I'm not here to conquer you. I'm here to fit. It felt ridiculous until the gusts died just a little. I let myself take that as permission. Vivian's feasibility money hit my account 2 days before I flew west. She didn't come with me, she doesn't do hand-holding. Instead, she sent a text that was pure Vivian, an arrow wrapped in silk. Due diligence is not a mood, Lena. It's a religion. I rented a beat-up Subaru and drove north from San Francisco, past the neon sprawl of the city into redwood-shadowed roads that seemed to breathe. The land parcel I'd identified wasn't the one Noah and I had drooled over in college. That one had too much erosion risk and a nasty tangle of title issues. This cliffside was different. Set back just enough from the drop, kissed by wind but protected by a crescent of Monterey cypress, with a gravel driveway that ended at a weathered gate and a hand-painted sign. Sea Haven, private. Sea Haven turned out to be a single-story, gray-shingled house with a widow's walk and a stubborn chimney leaning like an old shoulder. The owner, Eleanor Brackett, met me on the porch wearing a navy fisherman's sweater and the kind of calm that makes you confess your life. She had a voice like sanded oak and sea-glass eyes. Lived there 40 years, she told me. Her husband, a marine biologist, had passed 8 years back. Kids in Oregon. Arthritis in her hands. Too much house. I don't want to see it torn up by people who don't listen, she said, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug. This bluff has moods. Men with money forget that. I won't, I said, and meant it so hard it hurt. I didn't have purchase money. Not yet. But I had a plan, and a lawyer whose eyebrow could stop a freight train. Sloan Park, environmental attorney out of Oakland, wore navy suits that meant business and sneakers that meant she moved faster than everyone else. She dropped into the sea salt air like a verdict, hair in a tight bun, binder thick enough to be weaponized. We sat at Eleanor's kitchen table with tea that smelled like citrus, drafting what Sloan called a respect-first agreement. A 1-year option to purchase at a locked price, contingent on us clearing pre-application hurdles with the California Coastal Commission and county planning. In exchange, monthly option payments, a maintenance crew to shore up the bluff's native plants, and a community promise. No fences to block the public's ocean view. Eleanor listened, then nodded once, more to herself than to us. She slid the pen across the table. Don't embarrass me, she said. The Pacific hammered the rocks below like a stamp of approval when the ink dried. A team forms in fragments, and then one day you look up and realize you're no longer alone with your ideas. Mine began as names in my notebook and became people I would end up trusting with my future. Ari Bennington, structural engineer out of Santa Cruz, had hands that looked like they'd been dipped in graphite. He spoke to beams like friends, and the first time he sank a soil probe into the bluff he murmured, "You're stronger than they think," like he was talking to a stubborn horse. Marisol Vega, project manager, wore a bright blazer to our first meeting at a Fort Bragg diner and laid out a Gantt chart between the ketchup and the sugar packets. Her smile could defuse a bomb and her calendar could kill one. She also owned 3 different hard hats and named them. Kaito Nguyen, sustainability systems savant, biked up to the site on a matte black e-bike that looked like a stealth fighter. He had a way of making the impossible sound like a solvable math problem. Closed-loop gray water is non-negotiable, he told me. And the microgrid needs to be sexy. Guests should see the intelligence. Sexy microgrid, I repeated, half laughing. Don't smile, he said. I'm serious. We worked out of a borrowed conference room above a bookstore on Main Street, the kind with shelves that breathed dust and secrets. The town smelled like salt and espresso. In the afternoons, light fell through the windows like bottled amber. We covered the walls with site maps, environmental surveys, and renderings that no longer looked like Noah's fantasy. This was ours. Low-slung wind kind, cedars peeled back just enough to frame the horizon. Not a glass brag, but a quiet engine for comfort. At night I rented a furnished room over a print shop. The mattress had a squeak, the bedside lamp buzzed, and every time I turned the hot water on the pipes made a sound like a whale clearing its throat. I loved it. It made me feel honest. I cooked pasta with too much garlic and fell asleep with my laptop open. Permit guidelines on one side of the screen, revenue models on the other. Permitting in California is a maze designed by someone who hates your ambitions. Sloan guided us through pre-application consultations like a chess player. We met with Mendocino County Planning in a room that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The planner, Dev Patel, flipped through our materials, paused at the bluff stabilization plan and raised an approving eyebrow. You did your homework, he said. Sloan did, I answered, because truth is good luck. The Coastal Commission was trickier. We requested a pre-app meeting, which sounds friendly and isn't. It's where they tell you all the ways you'll need to bend to the ocean's will. We went in with humility in numbers. Kaito explained the microgrid like poetry. Ari showed how pilings and setbacks respected the cliff's moods. I talked about jobs for locals, partnerships with the community college to train maintenance techs, a profit-sharing model with a fund earmarked for coastal habitat restoration. When we finished, nobody clapped, obviously. But the senior analyst, a woman with a pelican pin on her lapel, stopped me as we were packing up. "You're not greenwashing," she said. "I can smell that a mile away. Keep listening. This might work." It doesn't sound like much, but in Coastal Commission, that's practically a Valentine. Small wins funded bigger steps. Vivian released the second tranche of feasibility funding with a message that made me both sweat and grin. "You're clearing gates. Don't slow down." Also, margins aren't a suggestion. We opened a tiny project office near the pier. Marisol tacked up a schedule the length of a crime novel. Kaito installed a whiteboard labeled Power Flows and underlined it 3 times like he was casting a spell. Ari drove stakes into the bluff at dawn, measuring how the soil spoke after a night of wind. In the evenings I walked the public path with a thermos of tea and listened to what the ocean told me when it was tired. Fort Bragg teenagers taking prom photos by the rail, a couple fighting softly about whether to adopt a dog, a man singing to himself and not caring about the key. I wasn't living inside my heartbreak anymore. I was living inside a place. Of course, the internet noticed. Someone with a drone filmed Ari and me on the bluff and posted it with the caption, "New eco-resort coming to Mendo?" A local blog picked it up. Then a Bay Area hospitality newsletter emailed me asking for comment. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to say the name out loud yet. We'd chosen it in the bookstore conference room on a morning the fog sat low and stubborn. Names have weight. They tell people what story they're booking when they book you. Noah would have picked something performative, Salt Plus Glass or Pacific Halo, the kind of thing that photographs well on an influencer's hat. I wrote Tide Light on the whiteboard and stepped back. "Hotels sell sleep, yes," I said. "But what we're really selling is how the edge of the world feels at dusk. What the water does to your thinking. Tide Light. The line between day and night. The place where the sea holds the sun for a second and then lets go." Kaito nodded. Marisol smiled. Ari just grunted, which was his way of agreeing enthusiastically. We filed the LLC. We filed the trademark application. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Seattle number. "We should talk about your timing." I froze. The room dimmed like a cloud had walked across the sun. I didn't reply. I wouldn't give him that intimacy. Vivian called that afternoon as if she'd sensed the mood from 300 miles away. "Competitors are oxygen," she said. "Breathe them. Don't choke on them." "Do you think he knows?" I asked, hating the smallness in my voice. "Of course he knows," she said. "You moved his cheese. He's allergic to hunger." The first real test came not from a message but from a room. The Mendocino County Board of Supervisors scheduled a public hearing for our coastal development pre-application comments. It was technically a workshop, not a decision, but everybody treated it like a verdict. The room was full. Fishermen in ball caps, retirees with careful pens, a science teacher with a seaweed tote bag, a man who introduced himself as a poet and then emailed me 17 haikus about whales. Marisol lined up our handouts like soldiers. Sloan reviewed notes with the exact calm you hope your airplane pilot has when one engine's out. Kaito whispered to himself and erased a line on the power flow chart like it had insulted his mother. I straightened the copy of our rendering. It looked strong. Not loud. Tide Light at the bottom in a typeface that didn't try too hard. I swallowed. My mouth was dry. Public comment began. A fisherman stood up and said he didn't want his view blocked by some glass spaceship. And I wanted to hug him because our design blocked no views and I'd been dying to say so. A woman from the local historical society asked about the cedar sourcing and smiled when I mentioned salvage partnerships. A teenage girl with a shaved head said she wanted a job that didn't require leaving home and asked if we were hiring interns. My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "Yes, we are." And then the back door opened. He walked in like a storm front. Noah, hair shorter, jaw harder, wearing a navy jacket I'd never seen. Beside him, Claire, crisp and polished, a tablet tucked against her side like a thin shield. They didn't look at me at first. They walked to the front row and took the last 2 seats, And the only reason I didn't physically sway was because Marisol's hand landed on the small of my back for one grounding second. Sloane's mouth barely moved. Don't react. Noah raised his hand during public comment like a good citizen. The chair recognized him. He stood, turned with a pleasant smile to the supervisors, and introduced himself in a voice pitched to Carrie. Noah Carraway, co-founder and managing director of Hearthline Projects in Seattle. We specialize in small-footprint coastal retreats. He waited exactly one beat before adding, we're also exploring a Mendocino site. The word also slid into the room like oil. He didn't look at me, but he did not look at me either. It was the gaze of a man presenting a knife and asking if anyone minded that it was sharp. He complimented our intent, then questioned our erosion setbacks. He praised our microgrid, then raised concerns about visual continuity. He smuggled doubt into the transcript with the grace of a professional. Claire didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was the money that made his sentences glide. I answered calmly. I kept my voice low, sure informed. I quoted our geotechnical study, referenced the coastal staff notes, named the seabirds by their specific breeding habits. The room listened. The poet nodded like I'd just saved a whale with a sentence. We broke for 10 minutes. The hallway smelled like coffee in cardboard cups. I went to the water fountain and pressed the silver bar with more force than necessary. Lena. His voice behind me, inevitable as tide. I turned. Up close, his eyes were the same blue-eyed, memorized and then forgotten, and then hated myself for remembering. For a half-second the old electricity flickered. Then I saw the calculation behind it and the moment burned off like fog. You look good, he said, like it was generous of him to notice. Ambitious. Ambition suits me, I said. We should compare notes, he said lightly. No need to make enemies out of people who know each other well. I stared at him. You ghosted me. He had the grace to blink. We drifted. It happens. You moved states without a goodbye, I said. It doesn't just happen. He tilted his head as if my pain were an abstract he could assess. Lena, I'm building something real now. So am I said. He smiled, then a small tight thing. Be careful. Out here the coast eats amateurs. I didn't say what I was thinking. I learned from the best. I walked past him into the bathroom where I locked a stall and breathed until my voice would obey me again. When the hearing resumed, Dev Patel thanked everyone and outlined next steps. No decisions today, just comments for the official record. The crowd shuffled out, a murmur of opinions and salt. We packed our materials. I didn't look at Noah. I didn't have to. I could feel his attention like static. Back at the office, a FedEx envelope was propped against our door. Inside, a letter on expensive paper from a Seattle law firm I'd never heard of. Legal paragraphs stacked like teeth. The gist was simple. Hearthline Projects alleged that Tide Light infringed upon their pending trademark Tide Line for hospitality services. They demanded we cease use of our name within 10 days. At the bottom, in handwriting I knew too well, someone had added a note. Hate to see you waste money on signage. And Marisol swore under her breath. Kaito muttered something about entropy. Sloane's laugh was soft and cold. Cute, she said. They filed 3 days after your application. We'll fight it. Vivian called before I could. I've seen the letter, she said without hello. They want you rattled. Be rattled for 12 minutes. Then stop. I hung up and stood by the window. Outside, gulls stabbed at invisible currents, and the ocean, indifferent and immortal, kept flexing its blue muscle. My reflection in the glass looked steadier than I felt. He had taken my silence once. He would not take my name. I pulled out a fresh legal pad, wrote new name at the top and drew a hard line through it. Then I wrote "No." The next morning, before dawn, I walked out to the bluff with a thermos and the kind of stubbornness that can move heavy things. The sky was a bruised purple, the horizon a thin wire of light. I stood where our entry path would someday begin and closed my eyes. The wind pushed at my jacket. The grasses hissed. The cliff breathed. Behind me my phone vibrated. A voicemail transcribed itself on screen from an unknown number. The first line rendered slowly, letter by letter, as if the phone were thinking hard about whether I could handle it. We need to discuss your option on Sea Haven, the transcription read. You're not the only party at the table. When I hit play, Eleanor's calm, oak-sanded voice filled the morning air. It wasn't calm this time. Lena, it's Eleanor. A man came by the house. Said he represents another buyer. He brought offers. Plural. He mentioned your name and he knew Vivian's. He knew everything. I told him we had an agreement, but he said agreements can be, what was his word? Revisited. I thought you should know. The ocean exhaled long and low. Across the water the sunrise finally broke. And for the first time since Noah walked into that room I felt something different than anger. I felt the clean, bright click of a fight worth having. The first rule Vivian taught me about business war was this. Don't waste your energy on outrage when precision will do the job better. I kept that in my head as I stood in the tiny project office above the pier, Eleanor's voicemail replaying in my mind like a warning bell. Noah wasn't bluffing anymore. He'd stepped off the sidelines and was coming for the one piece of ground that mattered more than any blueprint. Sea Haven itself. Eleanor met me at her kitchen table the next afternoon, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. The ocean was louder here, rattling the windows like it wanted in on the conversation. He came in smiling, she said, shaking her head. The kind of smile that's too practiced. Said he could match your offer and double the monthly payments until closing. Then he started talking about a helipad. Ari, seated across from her, let out a low whistle. Nothing says respect the bluff, like carving it up for helicopters. Eleanor's eyes slid to me. I told him we had an agreement, but he made it sound like paper was just paper. It's more than paper, Sloane said from the corner, her voice clipped. It's a recorded, enforceable option with defined terms and penalties for breach. If he wants to play hardball, I'll bring a bat. Eleanor looked between us, the weight of decision pressing into the lines of her face. I don't like games, she said. This isn't a game, I told her. It's an attempt to make you doubt what you already chose. Don't let him. She studied me for a long moment. Then she pushed the mug away. I won't. But you'd better be ready because men like that, they don't walk away just because you tell them no. When I left, the air smelled like incoming rain. That night our office became a war room. Marisol taped a new sheet to the wall titled Countermeasures in all caps. Kaito drew an exaggerated caricature of Noah with dollar signs for eyes in the corner, then started diagramming how we could secure our supply agreements before Hearthline even got its permits. Speed is defense, he said, uncapping another marker. If we're building relationships with contractors and the county now, he'll be walking into a room we've already furnished. Ari added, we also need a bluff stabilization plan so airtight they can't poke holes in it at public hearings. He'll try to use erosion risk as his wedge. I wrote in thick black ink, own the narrative. Because here's the thing about small towns and big projects. Stories travel faster than filings. If Noah positioned himself as the savior of the coast, it wouldn't matter that our design was more sustainable. The public would remember the headlines, not the fine print. So we called a meeting. Not with the supervisors. Not with the Coastal Commission. With the people. We rented the back room of the Wharfside Cafe, the one with knotty pine walls and a view of the harbor. Marisol made flyers. Ari brought diagrams printed big enough to see from the doorway. Kaito hauled in a small solar array to show off what a sexy microgrid actually looked like in practice. I didn't make a speech at first. I poured coffee, I passed around cookies from the bakery down the street. I asked people what they wanted to see in a resort that called their coast home. And they told me, jobs that paid well, housing allowances so locals weren't priced out, partnerships with fishermen instead of pushing them off the pier. When I finally stood at the front, I didn't talk about Noah or competition or even money. I talked about Eleanor, about the bluff, about the way the cypress trees lean just enough to make you feel like the wind is your co-conspirator. This isn't just my project, I said. It's ours. If we do it right, the coast doesn't lose anything, it gains. By the time we closed up, I had a dozen business cards in my pocket and 3 offers from locals to volunteer on site prep days. One of them was the poet who promised to write haikus about our construction milestones. 2 days later, the first article hit. Tide Light, an eco-resort that might actually deserve the view, Mendocino Chronicle. The photo was of me and Eleanor on the bluff, wind in our hair, both of us squinting into the light like we could already see it built. I almost smiled until I saw the next headline. Hearthline projects eyes Mendocino coast with Community First Design. Bay Area Business Journal. In the photo, Noah and Claire stood side by side in tailored coats, their rendering behind them. All steel and glass and architectural ego. The caption mentioned their innovative public access terrace, which anyone who knew the bluff could tell was a logistical nightmare. I forwarded it to Vivian. She replied with a single line, "You're winning when they copy you." The real strike came from an angle I hadn't expected. Sloane called me into her office one rainy morning and slid a document across the desk. It was an email chain, county staffers discussing preliminary scheduling for permit hearings. Someone had forwarded it to us anonymously. In the middle of the chain was a short, sharp note from an address I didn't recognize. Hearthline's consultants have raised concerns about the objectivity of staff reviewing Tide Light's application, given their personal connections to Ms. Caraway. It was a seed of doubt, planted in the exact soil where it could grow into delays. Sloane's jaw was tight. This is him trying to make you radioactive. Slow you down long enough to get ahead. What do we do? I asked. We make your application so clean, so transparent, that the whisper campaign has nowhere to land. And then she did something I'll never forget. She handed me a pen. You're going to draft the public statement yourself. No legalese. Just the truth. Signed in your name, not the company's. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter, the sound of the rain mixing with the hum of the fridge. I wrote about why I'd come to Mendocino, about Eleanor, about the bluff's moods and how the ocean teaches humility. I wrote about building something that belongs to the place, not just perches on it. When it was done, I sent it to the Chronicle and posted it on Tide Light's Barebones website. I didn't mention Noah once. I didn't have to. The next morning my inbox was full. Not all of it was friendly, but enough was. One email stood out. It was from an address with a domain I didn't recognize, just 3 words in the subject line. We should meet. The body of the email was short. I'm an investor. And I don't like bullies. The email felt like a pebble dropped into still water, small but promising ripples. I stared at it for a full minute before forwarding it to Vivian. Her reply was instant. Find out who they are. Today. An hour later, I was seated in the corner booth of the Wharfside Cafe, the one with a view of the harbor where fishing boats rocked against their moorings. The investor was already there, a tall woman in a camel coat, hair the shade of copper when it catches sunlight. She extended her hand. Maya Renwick. I run a private equity group out of Portland. And before you ask, yes, we make money. But more importantly, we protect our investments, especially from men like the one you're up against. Her grip was warm, steady, the kind that told you she didn't bluff. We ordered coffee and she leaned in. I've been following Hearthline. They've made enemies in every state they've touched. Overbuilt a dune in South Carolina and got sued by the town. Tried to muscle into a community in Oregon and ended up in litigation with a tribal council. Now I hear they're coming for Mendocino, and you. Where did you hear about me? I asked. That statement you posted. I read it twice. My partner read it 3 times. You sound like someone who understands the difference between profit and greed. Maya slid a folder across the table. Inside were glossy portfolio sheets and letters of intent. I'm offering bridge funding, enough to secure Sea Haven outright and keep your contractors locked in through the permitting gauntlet. I want in for 20% equity and a board seat. In exchange you get speed and muscle. Why? I asked, still skeptical. Because, she said, her voice cooling, people like your ex think they can outspend conviction. I enjoy proving them wrong. The deal with Maya closed in 8 days. Lightning speed in investment terms. Vivian reviewed every clause, Sloane cross-examined every signature, and Marisol updated the project schedule with a red pen like she was marking battle positions. The first wire transfer landed on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Sloane and I were in Eleanor's kitchen, sliding a cashier's check across the table. This means, I told her, you can stop answering your door to strangers. Eleanor's smile was small but real. And you can stop worrying about paper being just paper. The deed transfer was recorded the next Monday. Tide Light wasn't just an idea anymore. It had an address. Owning the land changed the air in the office. Ari walked in with a fresh survey map and said, "Now we can talk real foundations." Kaito unrolled a systems diagram that looked like the wiring plan for a spaceship. Marisol tacked up a wall calendar that blocked half the whiteboard. But the win wasn't ours alone. That week we hosted a second community night at the cafe. More people came, dockworkers, a high school science club, even the fishermen who'd been wary at the first meeting. This time they didn't just ask questions. They offered. A retired carpenter volunteered to help with salvage timber prep. A teacher suggested a field trip for students to watch the construction process. We were becoming part of the town's vocabulary, which meant no one noticed. The first sign was a billboard just outside town. A glossy rendering of his Hearthline resort, tagline in clean white letters, "Your coast, our care." I pulled over on the gravel shoulder, staring at it through the windshield. The building in the image looked like a spaceship pretending to be a lighthouse. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Nice view, isn't it?" I didn't reply, but I took a picture of the billboard and sent it to Vivian. Her answer: "If they're spending on billboards, they're bleeding somewhere else." Maya's first board meeting with us was not polite. "You need a PR firm," she said bluntly. "Your local charm works here, but Hearthline's not playing to the locals. They're playing to the investors, the regional press, the influencers. You need someone who can get you coverage beyond the Chronicle." Vivian didn't argue, which told me she agreed. 2 weeks later, we had Juno PR out of San Francisco, lean, sharp, with a knack for turning small-town stories into big-city news. They booked me on a Bay Area morning show. I sat under bright studio lights talking about sustainable coastal development while a photo of Sea Haven's windswept bluff filled the screen behind me. By the time I got back to Mendocino, my inbox was flooded with inquiries. Some from curious guests to be, others from investors I'd never met. And one email from a name I knew too well. From Noah Caraway. Subject: "We can still work together. You've built something impressive. I'll admit that. But you're making this harder than it needs to be. Hearthline has resources you don't, and together we could make something even bigger than you've imagined. Let's meet. Talk numbers." And I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I hit delete without replying. Because the truth was, for the first time since Whole Foods in those 6 words, I didn't want anything from him. Not even an apology. 2 days later, Sloane burst into the office, rain still dripping from her coat. "He's filed a formal appeal on your preliminary permit clearance," she said. "Claims environmental impact inconsistencies. It's not a death blow, but it's a stall tactic." "How long?" I asked. "A month. Maybe 2. Marisol swore. Kaito started muttering about rerunning simulations. I just stood there, letting the frustration simmer. We had the land, the funding, the town's trust. Now we just needed to survive his delays long enough to break ground. And as I looked around at my team, at Maya calmly checking her phone, Vivian already drafting a counterplan, Sloane peeling off her wet coat, I realized something. Noah thought he was up against me. He had no idea he was up against us. The hearing room was already standing roomily when I walked in. It wasn't supposed to be the hearing. Technically, this was an appeal review session for Noah's latest attempt to stall our permit. But in Mendocino County, those words might as well have been main event. Every seat was filled. Fishermen in their work boots, retirees in fleece vests, high school kids with notebooks. The poet was there again, wearing a shirt that said "Let the coast breathe." And at the back, leaning against the wall like he owned the air, was Noah. Claire stood beside him, perfect posture, eyes scanning the room like she was already measuring the drapes for her victory party. I walked to our table at the front where Sloane had already set up. Thick binders, color-coded tabs, a legal pad with a short, precise list of points she intended to hammer home. Ari was flipping through bluff stabilization diagrams, Marisol had our schedule and budget lined up like ammunition, and Kaito was hunched over his laptop fine-tuning a set of power flow visuals he swore would make the grid look irresistible. Maya arrived last, sliding into the seat beside me, phone in hand. "Press is here," she murmured. "San Francisco Chronicle, maybe Sacramento Bee. If we win this, we don't just get the permit, we own the story." The session began with the chair summarizing Noah's appeal. Alleged inconsistencies in our environmental impact assessment, specifically related to seabird nesting data and runoff management. I almost smiled. We triple-checked both. He wasn't aiming to win, he was aiming to delay. Every week he could keep us in limbo was another week for Hearthline to charm investors and whisper doubts about Tidelight's viability. Sloane went first, her voice calm but sharp. She dismantled the appeal point by point, citing not only our own studies but independent surveys commissioned by the county. She handed the board copies of a letter from the Audubon Society commending our design's minimal disruption to bird habitats. When it was my turn, I stood and walked to the projector, queuing up Kaito's visuals. Runoff isn't just a line item, I said. It's a commitment to the coast itself. Our design doesn't just meet county requirements, it exceeds them. Every drop of water that touches our roofs and paths will be captured, filtered, and reintroduced to the landscape in a way that mirrors natural cycles. I clicked to the final slide, a rendering of the bluff after construction. Native plants restored, public paths open, the building sitting low and unobtrusive in the landscape. It didn't look like a resort. It looked like it belonged there. Then Noah took the microphone. He started with a compliment because that's what he does. Makes you drop your guard just enough to let the blade slip in. Tide Light's design is thoughtful, he said, looking directly at me. But thoughtful doesn't always mean viable. He questioned our long-term maintenance plan. He hinted, without proof, that our funding might not stretch far enough for operational stability. And he kept using the word risky in a way that made it sound like he was doing the county a favor by pointing it out. Claire didn't speak, but she didn't have to. She sat beside him, nodding at the right moments, the picture of composed agreement. When he finished, the room was quiet in that tense, electric way that means everyone's picking a side in their heads. Public comment opened. First up was a local shop owner who said she'd lived through 3 failed resort projects and didn't want another. Then a fisherman who worried about dock congestion. A teacher who wanted assurances that jobs would go to locals first. I answered each question directly, making commitments we could actually keep. No spin. No empty promises. And then Eleanor stood. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried, strong and unshakable. I've lived on that bluff for 40 years, she said. I've seen storms rip trees out by the roots, and I've seen men with money try to force this coast to bend to them. Lena came to my kitchen table and she listened. Not just to me, to the land. I sold her my home because I trust her to build something that will outlast all of us. I've heard enough talk from outsiders. Let her do the work. The room erupted in applause. Even the chair had to bang the gavel to settle people down. When the board returned from deliberations, the chair cleared his throat. After reviewing the appeal, we find no cause to alter or delay the preliminary clearance of Tide Light's permit application. The appeal is dismissed. Noah's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. He gathered his papers, whispered something to Claire, and walked out. The moment the door closed, I exhaled so hard it felt like I'd been holding my breath for months. That night, the Wharfside Cafe was packed. Locals bought rounds for our team, and the poet recited a haiku about victory that made Ari laugh for the first time in weeks. Vivian called from "You've broken the choke hold," she said. "Now you run. Fast." He was right. The next morning, Marisol's updated calendar was brutal. Tight deadlines, overlapping tasks, no margin for error. But it was also clear. We were building. For the first time since Noah's text in Whole Foods, the finish line wasn't just possible. It was in sight. The first truck rolled onto the bluff at dawn. It was an old flatbed loaded with cedar beams salvaged from a deconstructed warehouse in Oakland. Ari was there before sunrise, clipboard in hand, hard hat already scuffed from years in the field. He watched each beam come off like a jeweler inspecting stones. "This is it," he said to me, low and certain. "Once the first timber hits the ground, the project stops being an idea." I knew what he meant. 4 months, Tide Light had existed in renderings, contracts, and the space between people's promises. Now the bluff was about to change, not in theory but in the echo of hammers and the cut of saws. Construction started quietly, almost reverently. We laid the foundation in stages, every move triple-checked for erosion impact and stability. Kaito installed the first section of our microgrid framework, a modest row of panels that caught the early light and threw it back into the Pacific. By the second week, the site was alive. Cranes swinging, compressors thumping, the air smelling faintly of fresh-cut cedar and the ocean's salt. Locals stopped by to watch on their lunch breaks. The high school science club came out on a field trip, asking Ari more questions than he could answer in a single afternoon. Marisol ran the whole operation like a general. If a delivery was late, she knew the driver's first name and his mother's pie recipe. If a subcontractor tried to cut corners, she shut it down with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. The media caught on faster than we expected. Juno PR landed us a feature in Sunset magazine, 4 glossy pages of windswept photography and an interview where I talked about building with the coastline, not against it. Then the San Francisco Chronicle ran a Sunday spread on the future of sustainable hospitality, and Tide Light was the cover shot. That's when the calls started. Investors, hospitality groups, environmental nonprofits wanting partnerships. It felt like every hour I was either pitching, negotiating, or saying no to offers that sounded flattering but smelled like future regret. And, inevitably, Noah. His email came on a Tuesday morning, the subject line stripped of pretense. Acquisition proposal. The message was brief. Lena, we've both proven our visions have value. I'm offering a buyout. Hearthline acquires Tide Light, retains you as creative director, and pushes this to a global scale. I'm prepared to discuss numbers that make sense for everyone. And I didn't reply, but I forwarded it to Vivian and Maya. Vivian called within minutes. He's rattled, she said. You're past the point where he can outbuild you. Now he's trying to buy the win. Maya's email was even shorter. Make him watch you finish it. Finishing it, though, meant surviving the last and most dangerous stage of his interference. 2 days after the acquisition offer, we got word from the county. Hearthline had filed a formal complaint about our supply chain, claiming the salvage cedar was structurally compromised and a risk to guest safety. It was baseless, but it meant an unplanned inspection and potential work stoppage. Ari didn't even flinch. Let them come, he said, thumbing through the grading reports. Our beams could hold up a bridge. The inspectors arrived the next morning, 2 men in hard hats and reflective vests, clipboards in hand. They tested, measured, took photos. By mid-afternoon, one of them handed me a form with a stamped verdict. Pass in thick blue ink. Noah's tactic had failed, but it wasn't his last. The real blow came from a different direction. Late that week, Eleanor called. There's been a visitor, she said. Claire. She came alone. Said Hearthline could offer me a consulting position if I spoke publicly about regretting the sale. My grip tightened on the phone. And did you? Eleanor snorted. I told her the bluff would outlast both of them, and then I shut the door. By the time the framing went up, the site felt like a fortress. Not because of walls, but because of the people inside them. One afternoon, I stood on the skeleton of what would be our main terrace, the Pacific stretching endless in front of me. The wind was strong, but it carried the scent of cedar and progress. Down below, Ari was shouting measurements, Kaito was wiring another section of panels, and Marisol was crossing the gravel with her clipboard like a field commander. Maya came up beside me, hands in her coat pockets. Do you see it yet? She asked. Yes, I said. And I did. Not just the building, the endgame. Noah's last move wasn't going to be a letter or a billboard. It was going to be a pitch to the very investors circling us now, the ones watching to see which project would stand tallest when the dust settled. And I knew exactly how to beat him there. The trick wasn't getting investors' attention. We had that. The trick was making them believe Tide Light wasn't just a beautiful idea but a market inevitability. That meant 2 things. Public proof of demand and a narrative no one else could claim. Juno PR went into overdrive. We hosted a hard hat preview on the bluff, inviting select journalists, eco-travel bloggers, and 3 hand-picked influencers whose followings were more about wanderlust than selfies. Guests wore branded safety vests and hard hats, walked the skeleton of the main terrace, and sipped coffee from reusable mugs printed with Tide Light, the edge of the world. Kaito set up a live microgrid demo, powering lights and a sound system that played soft ocean audio even though the real waves crashed just yards away. Ari explained the cliff stabilization methods like he was giving a TED Talk. Marisol handed out brochures with our projected opening rates and occupancy figures, conservative enough to be credible, ambitious enough to spark greed. The next morning, we had coverage everywhere from Architectural Digest Online to a travel segment on a Bay Area morning show. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Maya was the one who saw the angle first. They're circling, she said, scrolling through her tablet. Not just individuals, groups. Hospitality funds, boutique resort chains, even a sovereign wealth fund sniffing around. If we're smart, we pit them against each other. An auction? I asked. Not exactly. We don't sell the whole thing. We sell the expansion rights. One-time license, limited regions, high upfront cost. They get to say they're bringing the Tide Light experience to Bali or Santorini, and we keep California. Vivian's eyes narrowed, a predator scenting blood. And every headline will say, Tide Light goes global before opening day. We scheduled investor presentations in San Francisco, LA, and New York within a 3-week window. Our pitch deck was surgical. The Bluff is our flagship. Occupancy projections based on advance interest, already waitlist-worthy. A brand story rooted in environmental stewardship, local integration, and design restraint. Something Hearthline could never fake. Proof of scalability without diluting the soul. At the end, the slide every investor waited for. Expansion opportunities, by invitation only. The first meeting was in San Francisco in a glass tower overlooking the bay. A hospitality conglomerate offered $8 million for Asia-Pacific rights on the spot. In LA, a luxury ecotourism group countered with $10.2 million for Europe. By the time we hit New York, the numbers were climbing into territory that made my stomach flip. In every room, we positioned Hearthline as another developer without ever naming them, subtly implying that ours was the ethical, inevitable brand and theirs wasn't. Investors don't need enemies spelled out. They fill in the blanks themselves. Word got back to Noah faster than I expected. The email came in at midnight. Clever move. But you're walking away from more than you realize. Hearthline can take this global in a way you can't. Name your number. We'll make you whole. And I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded it to Maya. Her reply was one word: leverage. The final investor meeting was back in San Francisco, in the rooftop lounge of a private club that smelled faintly of leather and ambition. We had 3 offers on the table already. The 4th was the one we'd been angling for. Atara Ventures, a fund with deep pockets, a strong sustainability record, and the kind of PR reach that could overshadow Hearthline entirely. Their managing director, a woman named Sarah Donnelly, listened to our entire pitch without interrupting. Then she leaned back, tapping her pen against the table. "We're in," she said. "But only if we get exclusivity for the Caribbean and South America. We'll pay $15 million upfront, plus a 5% royalty on gross for 10 years. The number hit the room like a wave. Vivian's brows didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. Maya sat perfectly still, the corners of her mouth barely twitching. 15 and 5, Sarah repeated. You keep California. You keep your bluff. We make sure your name becomes shorthand for coastal luxury that actually means something. I looked at my team. Ari nodded once. Kaito mouthed sexy microgrid. Marisol was already mentally updating the build schedule. I turned back to Sarah. Deal. 2 hours later, Juno PR sent out the press release. Tide Light sells international expansion rights for $15 million before grand opening. It hit the wires, the blogs, the business journals. The San Francisco Chronicle headline the next morning: Coastal upstart beats big developer to global market. And just like that, Noah wasn't chasing us anymore. He was chasing our shadow. The bluff smelled of cedar and salt on opening day. We timed it perfectly. Late September, when the Pacific light turns gold and the air carries that sharp edge that makes you feel awake down to your bones. The cypress trees framed the path. The native grasses we'd replanted swayed like they'd always belonged, and Tide Light stood quiet and certain on the cliff, every line of it answering to the landscape instead of fighting it. We'd sold out the first 3 months before a single guest had checked in. Half of them were Californians who'd driven by during construction, the other half people who'd read the sunset feature or caught the viral drone video of our microgrid lighting up the bluff at dusk. Opening day wasn't a ribbon cutting, it was a gathering. Eleanor stood at the entrance with me, greeting guests like she was welcoming them into her home. The high school science club toured the mechanical room with Kaito, marveling at the water reclamation system. Ari gave a quiet smile when a retired engineer traced his hand along a support beam and said, "Solid work." Even the poet was there, handing out printed haikus tied with hemp string. One of them read, "Where the tide exhales, light rests on the edge of day, and stays for the night." Noah arrived in the afternoon. Not as a guest, he hadn't booked. He came as a spectator, which somehow felt more dangerous. I saw him before he saw me, standing just past the terrace with his hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the lines of the building like he was searching for something to criticize. Claire wasn't with him. When he noticed me, he smiled, faint, like we were still co-conspirators in something. "This is impressive," he said. "Better than I thought you'd pull off." I didn't answer. He glanced toward the guests, the terrace, the photographers taking in the sunset. "You know, we could still." "No," I said. The word landed between us with the weight of every year, every blueprint, every fight. He studied me for a long moment as if memorizing the version of me standing here now, one he couldn't diminish, buy, or ghost. Then he gave a slow nod and turned toward the parking lot. I didn't watch him leave. 3 months later, Tide Light's occupancy rate was hovering at 96%. The press was still circling, and the royalty checks from Atara Ventures had started arriving. Vivian and Maya had been pushing for a conversation I'd been avoiding, whether to sell the flagship while it was still riding the wave of its own myth. Strike when the story's at its peak, Vivian said over coffee one morning. You can build 10 more of these if you want. But your freedom? That's worth cashing in on now. It wasn't an easy decision. I'd built this place with my hands, my stubbornness, my refusal to let someone else's betrayal dictate the ending. Selling felt like walking away from more than a building. But one foggy morning, standing on the terrace with a mug warming my hands, I realized something. Tide Light wasn't mine anymore. It was the town's, the coast's, the guests who'd fallen asleep to the sound of waves and woken up believing in something softer and stronger than glass and steel. The offer came from a boutique hospitality group out of Vancouver. $42 million for the property, the brand rights in North America, and a 10-year commitment to uphold our sustainability practices. It was clean, it was fair, and it would mean more than quadrupling every dollar I'd poured into this dream. I signed the papers in Sloane's office. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like it knew it was closing a circle. The next day I packed my office, just a few boxes. My original sketchbook, a framed photo of the bluff before we touched it, and the first prototype mug from our cafe. Eleanor came by to hug me goodbye. Ari, Kaito, and Marisol promised to send updates from the new projects. As I drove away down the winding coastal road, the ocean was calm, the kind of calm that hides its own power. Somewhere in Seattle, I imagined Noah reading the headline. Tide Light Founder sells flagship for $42 million. And for the first time since he'd left me in that Whole Foods aisle, I didn't care what he thought. Because I'd built the dream. I'd owned it. And I'd left on my terms. The first morning I woke up without Tide Light on my calendar, the silence felt enormous. No site reports. No inbox alarms. No wind charts or delivery schedules. Just a sunbeam cutting across my kitchen table in a rented bungalow in Santa Barbara, catching the steam from my coffee like a small miracle. Freedom sounded like ocean birds and a kettle cooling on the stove. I drove north that afternoon anyway. Habit maybe. Or something softer. Gratitude with a steering wheel. The highway curled along the coast, and the radio kept losing stations to static and then finding them again, like the air couldn't decide which song fit the day. Mendocino was itself, stubborn, windswept, beautiful. When I pulled into town, the bookstore's bell still made the same old brass sigh. The barista at the cafe remembered my order without the cinnamon. The pier creaked like an old friend. And the bluff? It exhaled. Tide Light sat low and sure in the late light, cedar deepening to honey, glass catching only what the water offered. Guests moved along the path in soft voices, the way people do in places that teach reverence without a sign that says, "Quiet, please." Children tiptoed to the railing and gasped because the horizon still behaves like a magic trick if you're young enough, or honest enough, to let it. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I walked the public path and watched the building do the one thing I'd begged of it. Belong. Eleanor found me near the cypress grove where the wind always has something extra to say. Her hair was tucked under a knit cap, her smile easy. They kept the promise, she said, nodding toward the terrace. No fences. The view's still everybody's. I knew they would, I said. It was true. It was also hope paid forward. She hooked her arm through mine and we stood like that for a while, two women who'd signed a contract with a place and honored it. When the sun tilted lower and the water threw back a strip of molten gold, I told her about my next plan. A small fund seeded from the sale to back coastal projects that put humility first. Not glossy green press releases, actual stewardship. Small towns. Smart systems. People who listen. Call it the Sea Haven Grant, she said, the name landing as gently as her hand on my sleeve. If you don't, I will. The fund's site went live a month later. We kept the application short, the metrics real, the photos of the coast unfiltered. The first grant paid for living shoreline plantings 2 counties south. The second set up paid internships for local high schoolers to learn microgrid maintenance. Kaito recorded a video course and titled it with absolute sincerity, Sexy Power Boring Failsafes. Ari sent notes from a cliff in Big Sur. Soil says yes if you listen first. Marisol mailed me a postcard that was really a schedule and I laughed so hard I nearly spilled tea on it. Vivian and Maya? They sent deal flow and warnings and the occasional late-night text that said nothing more than proud of you. Sleep. I learned to do both. I kept the first Tide Light mug. The misprinted one where the logo sits a little too high, and it's the one I reach for when the mornings are stern. It reminds me to aim carefully, to let imperfection ride shotgun with ambition. One morning an email found me. Not a proposal. Not a headline. A note from a guest who'd stayed a weekend to scatter his sister's ashes from the public path where the wind knows what to do with grief. We came broken, he wrote. We left a fraction less. Your place didn't try to fix us. It just made room. I read it twice, then closed my laptop and took a walk because sometimes there's nothing to add. I saw Noah once more months later by accident. I was in Seattle for a panel and ducked into a coffee shop to escape the rain. He was at a corner table alone, the gray of the city caught in his eyes. We noticed each other at the same time. He lifted a hand, a small, uncertain wave, and I lifted mine back. That was all. No speech. No negotiation. No relitigation of the past. The door chimed when I left and the street smelled like petrichor and bus brakes and a clean kind of distance. Back home, the bungalow windows stick when the fog moves in and the lemon tree in the yard produces fruit like it's showing off. On Thursdays the neighbor's kid practices trumpet and misses more notes than he hits. I love it. It means he's trying. Sometimes I drive at dawn, chasing the line where the ocean melts into the sky. I pull over when a turnout looks right and drink coffee from a thermos that says Tide Light in a font I can't stop being proud of. The cup warms my hands. The horizon keeps its secrets. Success didn't come with a neon sign. Revenge didn't arrive with a soundtrack. Both turned out to be quieter than I expected. Decisions made in kitchens, in county rooms, on windswept paths, over contracts that said, we will be good to this place and it will be good to us. Don't bother coming back, his message had said once upon a time. It turned out to be the best map I was ever given. I didn't go back. I went forward.